Hello there, Sir from 17 once again. This is my Castlevania Legacy of Darkness. Hard difficulty, no damage. We're going to be using Cornell. He is the flagship of this version of Castlevania. And we're going to be starting in the Foggy Lake. So as the Necronomicon closes, you're going to notice visually, especially with the HUD assets, that it looks like the screen is juttering. And you don't see this when you play the game, or at least I don't notice it, but you do on the recordings, and I'm not entirely certain why this happens. So I apologise to the people who have not noticed it and now can't unsee it, but if anybody knows how to get rid of that, if it's a setting somewhere on the emulator, I would love to know. Because as you can tell from the visuals, I am indeed playing this on... I'm playing it on Retroarch of all places. It just worked, I didn't mess with it, it's all good. And I think it looks great, all considered, although I do miss the haziness of the distortion of what happens on a natural N64. But I've been having a bit of a nostalgic December, and that nostalgic December has led me to playing this game, which is an interesting one, and a bold one, and I'm going to be talking now for about the next 2 hours about just why I love Castlevania 64, which is quite a controversial opinion to some people, and it has been for a long time, even though it does seem like the internet is kind of going back on that in some ways, as people are trying it for themselves and realising that maybe it's not as bad as some of the spear campaigns have made it out to be. I apologise as well with the footage here too. I was quite excited when I was doing this segment, and I ended up not getting the key off the mast to open the cabin door. So I do a bunch of platforming and do the things you're supposed to do, and then I leave the most important component. So don't do that if you're following this as a walkthrough, even though I wouldn't recommend you do that because I'm going to be playing in a very specific way. But Castlevania 64 is kind of a misaligned game in many ways, and a game that's been remembered incorrectly. And it all depends on whether or not you were there or if you've heard about it through secondary sources. But I have some really bold claims about this game, and I'm going to get them out there really quick because I hate doing this, but I think it needs to be said. So you know how nowadays you can't watch a video game analysis or critique or review without somebody mentioning Dark Souls, and then when they do it, you roll their eyes because you know that they haven't put a lot of time into Dark Souls and they don't fundamentally understand what that game is or what that series is, because it's just a very casual appraisal and they do it for the clicks and they do it for the attention and the engagement. Well, I'm about to do it with this game, and I'm going to do it from the perspective of somebody who has spent far too long in Lordran and in Boletaria and in many of the other places too. I do believe that the DNA of this game is essentially Dark Souls before Dark Souls existed. And throughout this commentary, I'm going to talk about some of those elements. But I just think that there's so many nods and winks here by how difficult this game is, by how obtuse it is, by how punishing it is, and by how misunderstood it is as well. I think there's a lot of parallels between this and Demon Souls, because even the head of Sony didn't understand Demon Souls, and I think there's a lot of aspects that are mirrored here. And of course, it's not to the same influence or impact, or even to the same core designs in a lot of ways, but there's lots of little vestigial elements that I definitely see alive and well. And Castlevania 64 came out at a time when we'd not really figured out how to do this whole 3D action game thing. 3D was new, everybody was moving into that terrain, everybody was figuring out what was working, what wasn't working, and taking risks and being very creative. And it led on to be one of my favourite times in video games, because the Nintendo 64 is my favourite console. It is a really special console, and it's one of those things where there was just so much happening, even though when you look back on it, it might not seem like that much interesting in the grand scheme of the landscape of video games, but to be there, to be in that zeitgeist when everything was developing, it was an unbelievable time of experimentation and creation. And especially nowadays where video games come out so frequently and there's so many different ones and you can pretty much shop around forever and not find something for you, or get really lucky and find something very quickly. Nowadays it can be easy to take for granted what we have, and we can also take for granted just how almost jaded and stilted you can become because there's so much saturation. Whereas in these days, I'd not really played anything like this, and I wasn't the biggest Castlevania fan when it came out either. because I just couldn't get the games. Getting games in those days was hard. And I'd played a bit of Super Castlevania on the SNES, but this in many ways was my first Castlevania, and it is my favourite Castlevania too. And I might even go one step further and say I prefer Castlevania 64 to Legacy of Darkness, which is another one of those topics and conversations where some people will go, what are you talking about? Isn't this just a direct upgrade to that previous system? And in many ways, it is. But there's a lot of love and a lot of nuance that I think that they changed and they didn't need to, and I think in many ways they made it worse. Sadly, it's been a long time since I've played Castlevania 64, so my sentiments for this opinion come from when this game was new. Because I was there for it, and what a time it was. This sequence here is interesting too. This is one of the new levels. Previously in 64, you would start in the Forest of Silence, whereas here you start on this boat, and I've always loved this level, because I've just got a thing for like boat levels and train levels, and there's something about transit levels or transitory stages which definitely gets me. But this is cool because they want you to think that you're in risk of being flooded in this chamber, but it never fills up. And it's just a complete lie. It's a paper tiger room. So you can take your time, kill the mermen if you want to, and then get the hell out of there. And then it will lead you to this sequence here. And one of the reasons why I compare it to those legendary games that everyone compares everything to now is, you know, if you jump in the water here in any moment of these jumps and there's no railings to keep you in line, you instantly die. And if you don't save, you go back to the start of the game. But this is the first boss, and this boss is actually pretty hard, especially on hard. Hard changes everything. It's legit. But the idea here is his first attack will always be the grab, which you can jump, and if you can attack him on the right angle, you can double hit him. This move you want to misdirect by running towards a direction, and when you see him flinch, you want to turn away. Sometimes he'll fire in front of where you're going, sometimes he'll fire where you've come from. It seems to be really dynamic, but you get a feel for it the more times you get hit by it. And as long as you're constantly on him and hitting him, you should be able to put him down before too long. But respect those giant pillars of water, because the hitboxes are ginormous, absolutely nuclear. And then he falls down, and then that's the end of that. Really cool boss, I like him a lot. It's a nice introduction. I definitely think it gives it a different feeling. I'm also going to talk a little bit about hard mode now, because I don't know if I ever beat it on hard back in the day. Oh, by the way, be very careful of fleamen. This enemy will input read your attacks and they will dodge them. And every so often they'll jump towards you. So one of the things you can do is you can actually slide under them. And while you're sliding, you can press your melee button, which I think is left on the C buttons, and you will do a claw. So you can do that and kill them, cleave them in midair. And it can be very useful against enemies such as those. If you don't want to do that, you can use some of your sub-weapons. The axes lock onto them and destroy them. Holy water puts an area of denial. The cross will snipe them, so on and so forth. But as I was saying, I don't know if I beat this game on hard back in the day. I know I played the living shit out of these games, particularly Castlevania 64. This game, I bought it, I experienced all the new stuff, and I probably moved on to something else. But hard mode in Castlevania 64 just kind of increases HP thresholds. And then, of course, there's a couple of moments where they'll add an enemy, but other than that, you don't really notice it, because Castlevania 64 is so cranked anyway. And I actually think that, bosses aside, 64 is a much more difficult game than this, just because of the awkwardness of it. It's very punishing at times. Whereas here, there are lots of changes on hard. It feels like you get less gold. I don't know if that's placebo, but I did a practice run to see if I could do this on normal with Cornell. No damage the game, and I got about 26,000 gold without trying to get gold. On this run, I was at the end of the game and I'd only got like 17,000. It was a noticeable 10k difference. Like, I think I had 20k gold when I was in the villa, to give you an idea of just the distinction there. So I don't know if the drops are rarer. It seems like the sub-weapons are rarer. It seems like the gold is lessened. The jewels seem fine. I don't think they're affected too much. But enemies have more HP. That is 100% something you'll notice. And you will also notice additional enemies in sequences. And it seems to be the more upgraded versions of enemies as too in some places. So you can generally tell that just by them visually looking different, and a lot of the times they're a bit more tanky with the extra HP, so they'll take maybe 1 or 2 extra hits. The thing with Cornell, though, is he is incredibly powerful. This character makes Reinhardt look like a bitch. Carrie is strong and kind of cheesy, but she's awkward, and he's so powerful. Powerful in ways I don't even know if I fully appreciated back then. And you're going to see a really good example of it here as we take on this. Is it a Weir Tiger, this guy? Like, that is a mini-boss, technically. But he's got the big life bar, he cruises in, and we just put him down. If that was Reinhardt, we would have had to have done some positioning and some movement. And that type of stuff in Castlevania 64 is not as easy as it perhaps should be. And I do think that, for the most, they improved a lot of the enemies in this area, because the skeletons in the first game, they're so awkward, they're so tanky. Even on normal, they're tanky. They take multiple hits because Reinhardt is not as strong as Cornell. And the lock-on, there are aspects of the lock-on that are better in the first game than there are in this game. But because the skeletons go down so quickly, it never really becomes a problem. And they don't respawn as quickly either. Because Castlevania 64, sadly, one of the elements of its difficulty to try and make it feel a bit more hectic, I guess, is you're kind of always being assailed by infinitely spawning enemies, and it's just not as cool as it should have been. I would love to be able to go back in there and redesign fixed enemies for each of the rooms in the game, and then completely turn off the regenning stuff, because I don't think I've ever played a game where respawning enemies was fun. It just isn't my bag, it's not my design philosophy. And I think when you take it out, it's more enjoyable. Also, be very careful of the trees getting struck by lightning. If you get hit by the falling body of the tree, it will injure you. And there's a few things like that in this game that you've got to be kind of cognizant of. There are certain enemies that will grab you, and it seems like they don't do any damage, but if you don't get them off you, then they do. And then things like falling. Fall damage is kind of weird, because it seems like Cornell doesn't take the same fall damage that they took in the previous game. And we have a unique enemy just there, which is an enemy that you see way more frequently in the first iteration, which is the bomb skeletons. I kind of dig them, and you don't see them that often in this game. But in 64, you'll see them a whole bunch, and they're really cheap, because they run up to you and detonate, and sometimes you're just in the radius, which makes it kind of frustrating. But even a sequence such as this, because if you're wondering what Legacy of Darkness is a second iteration, almost like a director's cut of this game. It came out at the end of, was it 99? And the original came out at the beginning of 99. And they went in and they almost... People like to say that this is the game they wanted to make and they fixed all these things. And I kind of resent the idea of that, because I don't know if there's an interview I've not read. And obviously, Castlevania 64 was definitely rushed. But are we really certain that this is the perfect version of the game that they wanted? Because I don't think it is. There's a couple of things that stand out strikingly to me of it just not being the best version of itself. But I suppose if anybody in the comments knows, maybe you could elucidate. But you see people throw this word around all the time. And I like to think this is what they would have done if they'd have had a bit more time. Not necessarily the perfect version, not necessarily the game they wanted to ship, but I think they took in a lot of feedback, hopefully, from both the reviews and from maybe the player base, and they were able to make some adjustments, and they were just getting more confident with the technology, and then this is the result. I like these crypts in here, because you can break the stones on top, and there are these red skeletons, which normally red skeletons in Castlevania 64 cannot be killed, they can only be stunned, and you'll see them in the Tower of the Execution. However, here, it's almost like there's those poltergeists that are bound to their immortality, and if you break the ghosts, the skeletons become normal and you can kill them, which I think is a much better system for blood skeletons, because they're an infuriating enemy that just chases you relentlessly. You'll also notice, if you've come from Castlevania 64, that the enemies don't chase anywhere near as fast or as efficiently as they did in that game. It's kind of scary, actually, if you go in the crypts with the coffins, watching them try to jump after you and repeatedly jump into ceilings, because they're just super aggro. It's something. It really is. But one of my favourite things about this game is that there's lots of little secrets on the stages. The stages aren't the longest. They've definitely shortened Forest of Silence because it used to be a lot longer in the first game. But there are these little moments where you can interact with things and you get rewarded for your exploration and for your curiosity, and it's one of the things I love the most about video games. If you're wondering about saving too, guys, I'm not actually going to be using the save points, but I am going to be saving. I'm going to be using save states instead. There's a system in Legacy of Darkness which I'm not certain was in the original, and I still to this day don't really understand its purpose or its function. Is this the werewolf? It is. So, dude, this guy got nerfed. This guy got nerfed something fierce. Because he used to do this like super fast move and then he'd jump into the air, then do a dive kick and then like pirouette afterwards. He doesn't do any of that anymore, so they're actually really, really easy in this game. But if you fight the werewolf on 64, even on normal, he will be off camera the whole time, attacking onto camera and just knocking you down repeatedly. It's a real pain in the ass. Very dangerous monster. I recommend skipping it or finding a nice cheese spot because there's lots of that going on. And if you are interested in skipping stuff, from that lever over there, you can actually drop down some of these tablets, go through a broken hole in the wall, and skip most of this level. But because the enemies don't aggressively respawn like they do in the original, I'm going to be fighting as much as I can because I actually really like the combat in this game as much as it's kind of hard to do and awkward and not always ideal. So you're going to see me doing a lot of sequences that I could simply just run past, but I don't want to run past them because that's my fun of the game. In many ways, Legacy of Darkness and the game before it are platforming games because there's so much platforming in them. And I'm not the biggest platforming fan, even though I do like it here and I think it's a lot better than some people give it credit for. But for me, I like the fights, I like figuring out the patterns, I like the dance. And in spite of its kind of primitiveness, there is a joy to it, and there's a huge nostalgia too coming back, which is really, really nice. And if you're wondering why Cornell looks kind of weird, oh, by the way, if you're not quick here, these mermen will jump up on these platforms with you, and they'll even try and spit at you, so you want to get off there as quickly as possible. They do seem to come back, the mermen, as well. I don't know if there's a fixed amount, but I killed the first two, and then another one jumped up, and I just thought, yeah, I'm not doing this. So instead, we're going to run this way, and we're going to get to this boss. And this boss is different. One of the most dangerous aspects about bosses in 64 is that the boss camera locks onto the boss, and a lot of the times they put enemies with them. So this fight in the original had motorcycle skeletons, which are fantastic, but you couldn't see them because you were always looking at this guy. And what it leads to is it leads to you getting murdered by these dudes that you can't lock onto, and it makes it very awkward and kind of unfair. Whereas here, they took that out, and instead they gave him this jumping move, which I don't know if this is new, but I don't think he does it in the first one. And then they gave him this breath move. And this breath move is quite active, but the hitbox isn't that big. So all you really need to do is space the initial cloud, and then it's a great opportunity for damage. And on hard, everything takes a bit more of a beating, so you want to always get your damage in if you can. But what's going to happen, guys, is because I'm not saving, I'm not degrading my weapon. Because there's this strange survival horror element in Legacy, which involves when you hit a save point, it takes upgrades away from you. So you'll notice at the beginning of the video, Cornell's attack was blue, then it went purple, then it went red. Red is level 3, and it's the most powerful version. Truth be told, the difference in the damage between the three of them doesn't seem to be as noticeable as you'd think, because a lot of the damage thresholds in this game are governed by systems I don't fully understand. And this skeleton's a great example. You hit this guy a bunch of times doing almost no damage to him, and then you trigger a chunk off his life bar. Like it's hit based rather than actual damage based. And I don't know if it is, I just don't know enough. But that's what it feels like. So a lot of the times, having the most powerful upgrade on your character doesn't seem to make that much of a difference, especially compared to turning into a werewolf, which we've not talked about yet, but we're going to. So you have a choice every time you hit a save point. Do you take the risk of continuing on without banking progress with a powerful weapon, or do you save your progress, giving you a fail state, but bring yourself back to when you started? And on paper, in a vacuum, it sounds like an interesting system, But what's the point in an upgrade system where you're constantly getting cuckolded for trying to engage with it? I don't understand it, and I don't much like it either. So I'm going to be not saving and instead using save states on the save points to maintain my weapon. And what I'm going to do, because I'm doing that, is I'm going to refrain from using my sub-weapons. So you'll notice up to this point, if you've seen me throw an axe, it was by accident because I'm using an analog stick to do the C buttons instead of actual buttons, because, you know, N64 and everything. Which is unfortunate, but it does happen sometimes when I'm trying to do things. But I'm not going to be using sub-weapons at all. In my practice run, I experimented with the cross because I remember the cross being one of the best weapons in the game in 64. I think the Holy Water's the best, and I think the cross was really good for distance. In this game, though, the cross, even at level 3, because now when you get multiple versions of a sub-weapon, it upgrades the ability of the sub-weapon. And because the axes are so good at locking on, when you upgrade the axe, it does a lightning bolt and an additional explosion, and it does an obscene amount of damage. So if you want to get through this game and you're struggling, bring level 3 axes, because you will never run out of jewels, because there's so many of them, and they are just preposterously strong. But you're not going to see any real usage outside of one particular boss fight where there's a really nice strategy where you can use sub-weapons, and you're going to see me throw them at flea men so that I remind myself to tell you, if you're struggling with flea men because they're really, really annoying, throw axes at them, and it'll get rid of them. But I mentioned earlier on that I do think that there are aspects of Legacy of Darkness that are worse than the original game, and I think that Castle Wall, which is where we are right now, is a really good example. So this stage in the original was kind of annoying because there was no save point before the boss at the top of here, and there were a lot of bats that would fly at you and try and knock you off. And I also think if you go too slow, they spawn Medusa heads. And Medusa heads, I don't need to tell you how annoying they can be. You've obviously come across them in some Castlevania. They're a bit of a dick. In this game, there aren't any Medusa heads at all. They've limited the amount of of bats, and they've given you a checkpoint before this boss and a considerably better camera angle. Which I think is all net positives, right? However, they've made it so that you have to go up one of the walls twice and then go up the other one once. So instead of just going up the left one and then killing the boss and then going up the right one and opening the gate, you've got to do this weird thing. And there might be a super easy way of doing it. I don't do it correctly in this video, by the way. On my most recent playthrough after this, I did Sun Sun Night, and I think it worked, and I think that might be really good. That was so lucky just then. Did you see that? This boss really bugs me because it has 2 phases on the heads, and each phase drops a ton of items, but you can't pick them up, because trying to pick them up just tends to get you hit, and it really, really irks me when I can't collect all the good stuff. Look at all the treasure just being left behind. That is a heartbreaking moment for me. But this camera is superb compared to the one in Castlevania 64. But one thing that must be said, this fight on normal is really fun because nothing has too much tracking, and it feels like an ease fight. It feels like something where you can just naturally dodge an attack and there's a good balance between the 2 elements. On hard, all of that's gone. The tracking on the fireballs is obscene. The stupid breath can hit you through the wall as well if you don't kite it correctly. So the whole thing becomes do this weird peek game, counter peek each other, and then make sure you kill one of them and then go out and capitalize on the other one while being very cowardly. And in my recording run, I didn't want to do that. And I didn't think I needed to do that because I didn't need to do that on normal. On normal, I moved around the room, I used spacing, I used timing, the whole thing felt like a shmup. It was really fun because you can just sidestep the normal balls and then you can back up away from the big breath, and that's all that's really needed. But in hard, they've cranked it, and it's something that you're going to notice a lot. All of the environmental hazards on hard difficulty move faster. It's the same with a lot of attacks, fireballs, things of that nature. They are swifter, they've been accelerated, and personally, I don't think it's good. I think it's harder, absolutely, and I think it makes certain sequences very difficult for reasons which are just not the most fun, but I prefer the way the game works on normal in that regard. I don't mind the extra HP, I don't mind the extra enemies, but speeding up the traps is one of those dick moves that turns places like the Tower of Science into a nightmare. And I never liked the Tower of Science because I always thought it was just a bit boring in this game. And now it is legitimately annoying. But this is Castle Wall, and it's funny how you remember stuff from when you're younger. I have so many memories of getting my ass beat on this stage and falling down, and just the platforming being very difficult. And when I've come back to it after, 25 years of iteration in mechanics, but also 25 years of me playing every video game under the sun, I think the platforming in this game is really good. I just think it's more deliberate than people realised, and I just think that it's like anything else. The movement and the camera, they take some learning. There's a learning curve, and if you're not willing to put in the time to figure it out and engage with it, you're going to get frustrated. And there seems to be quite a lot of slander as far as Castlevania 64 is concerned, where you see a lot of these revisionistic reviews telling you that this game was hated when it came out and everybody bashed it. They didn't, guys. I was literally there. I was in secondary school. I was buying N64 magazines. I was probably the most passionate period of video games in my life, and I remember them vividly. So, at the time, in those magazines, Nintendo first-party games would get 90s, and 90s were amazing scores, right? Really, really good scores. Sometimes they'd get 98s and 96s, and sometimes that was just because, obviously, the games were amazing for the time, but additionally, these magazines were super biased. It was the Nintendo official magazine. Of course they're going to give fucking Mario 98. It's bloody Mario. He's on the cover. He's the reason it exists. But also, I got some of the other magazines that weren't that biased. They were a little bit less, partial to just sucking the rim. And I remember them giving Chameleon Twist like 30. That's a bad review, boys. You give somebody 30 out of 100, that's not so great. But Castlevania was getting 70s. It was getting mid-70s and 77 and 78, which, if you got 78 out of 100 on a test, you think you did really well, right? And that's what this game got. Sure, did they complain about the camera? They did. Did they complain about the platforming? They did. Did they complain about the difficulty? They did. However, almost all of them also expressed that there was some cool stuff here. And you know what's really interesting now when you look back on this debate and this discussion? At the time when Symphony of the Night came out, it didn't do so well. And I know you're probably being like, what the fuck are you talking about? It's one of the best games ever made. It is. But when it came out, dude, they were all being like, why isn't this 3D? They're all just like, this is an old game. Look how old this old game is, because it was 2D. And it's crazy, but it's true. Symphony of the Night didn't bomb, but it didn't do well. And it didn't do well because the industry was changing towards this obsession with polygons and 3 dimensions, and it didn't have it. Whereas this game did. And is this game better than Symphony of the Night? Of course it's not. Not even close. But to the people that were looking at what was coming next in video games, this game offered things that that game didn't. And it's crazy to think that that was ever a conversation, but it was apparent and it was loud. So Symphony of the Night goes on to now be remembered as one of the greatest games ever. Nobody remembers that when it came out, it was a little bit lukewarm. Even though the reviews were still good, they were just like, it's a bit dated. Which it's absolutely not. It's fucking timeless. But they were idiots, right? And that happens. So, Symphony gets remembered as this fucking masterpiece when Castlevania 64 gets remembered as this horrible piece of dog shit. Why? And I can't think for the life of me why this is, from what I was exposed to at the time, because I read the reviews, I got the game, I had friends who had the game, and we all loved the game. So in our world, Castlevania 64 is a great game, and as sacrosanct as this is to say, I'd not played Symphony of the Night. I ended up playing all the Game Boy Advance games that imitated it. So, all these years later, when I become more aware of this sentiment and I go looking into it and just being like, what are people talking about and what's happening? And especially now on YouTube, all you see are, we were wrong about Castlevania 64. They were wrong about Castlevania 64. In retrospect, this and that, all these different video essays, and I'm sitting there thinking, what the fuck is anyone talking about? The game was always good. It's just like anything else. If you didn't like it, you didn't like it. And then, as you dig a bit deeper, as I did many years ago, you find out that the angry video game nerd who is responsible for an entire generation of people's tastes, because he was one of the first on YouTube doing the thing and everybody emulated and copied him, apparently he had an episode where he just got stuck in the castle keep and couldn't do the Nitro segment. Which, don't get me wrong, I ain't gonna say shit about the Nitro segment because it's hard and it's awkward and it's tricky, and as a kid, dude, it destroyed us all. Literally. That's the Nitro segment, you know. The castle keeps the most legendary stage in Castlevania 64. And saddeningly to a player such as myself, it's not in this game. Outside of if you do the Carrie story and the Rindart story. Cornell never does the keep. And I love the keep because you fight all the vampires and then you fight that bull boss. But I didn't have YouTube in those days, guys. I didn't really know too much about YouTube. Like, my first username on YouTube, to give you an idea of the year I was using, it was American Psycho 17. Imagine that, right? A very long time ago now. And I didn't really understand what the whole purpose of YouTube was. I just like, oh yeah, videos and stuff, that's cool, I guess. So, I didn't know who the Angry Video Game Nerd was. And I was not influenced by him at all. And I don't want to blame him, because it's like anything else. I'm almost certain Angry Video Game Nerd, it's an act, it's a show and everything, and it's just kind of a amped up version of who he is. He played Castlevania 64, he had a bad time, and thus he said it was bad on a video, and lots of people believed him. And it's just one of those things, isn't it? It's one of those pitfalls of doing this. People have microphones, and they put their perspectives out onto the internet, and people listen to them, and they believe them, as if that they were gospel, without taking time to look into it themselves. And for me, there's nothing wrong with liking something or disliking something, but if you're going to listen to somebody tell you something and then not give it a chance yourself to form your own opinion, are you even alive at that point? Like, what are we doing? And it depends on who it's coming from, of course. If somebody knows you really well and says, oh, you won't like this, then maybe there's some validity to that. But random guy says this game's not very good and you're just going to believe it blindly, that makes no sense to me. I don't understand it. There are lots of problems with Castlevania 64. I could write a dissertation on some of the issues and some of the oddities and some of the things, especially in retrospect. But do you know what's more interesting to me for once? It's the shit it got right, all considering the time. Because the thing that I think people, especially when they revisit it, don't really understand is in 1999 there was no template, you know, there was no formula that everybody was rinsing. Every game was different, and when you don't have an extensive library of things to research in order to inform what you're making, you have to invent instead of reinvent. Anybody can reinvent something because the template's there, because they can literally look at the example and push forward. But when there is no example, what do you do? And people like to mention stuff like Ocarina of Time and whatnot. But if you think about Ocarina of Time, obviously it's got 3D elements in it, and it's this big 3D game, and they were going for something much larger scale. But there's also elements of Ocarina of Time with pre-rendered backgrounds and fixed cameras. So it's like, Ocarina is still trying to figure it out too, because that's what this generation was. It was people trying to understand what was happening. And of course that game had something called Z targeting, right? Which is a really cool system. And one of the best lock-on systems going. But you had to engage it, and when you didn't engage it, it was up to you then. It was up to you and how in your ability to maneuver the character, and of course, over time, people got a lot better at doing that. Whereas in this game, you don't have that luxury. The targeting in this is really, really strange. And it's different than what it was in the previous game too, because they tried to make the targeting better. In some ways they did, and in some ways they made it worse, which is kind of strange. But I have to talk about this next segment because there's 3 difficulty segments in this game. This is one of them. So at the beginning of the villa, you have to take on a horde of Cerberus. Cerberi? Serbs? I don't know how you say that. Serbians? The first initial wave is 2. And the trick to those 2 is to hit them both at the same time or be aggressive, kill one and then kill the other. Then there'll be a third one that jumps over the wall. Now there's going to be 2, but the right-hand side one spawns first to make it tricky to kill the left one. And then finally, it goes dark, and then they throw the final beast at you. This is going to look really easy, but it's not, guys. I reset here a dozen times, because the biggest problem is Cornell doesn't lock on to what you want. And sometimes he uses the wrong hand to throw his projectile. So if you look on the characters, do you see the square, the yellow square that's on this beast? When that's on an enemy, when you attack, Cornell will attack that square. And this is the only guide you have. And the idea is, you wait to attack when that's on people, and then you kill them. But the dogs are so fast, and they have incredible frame advantage that sometimes while you're attacking one, the other one will just come and wreck you. So you really have to get lucky in many ways there, or you have to know how to fight those enemies very confidently, because you can melee them when they get close, and it will push them back. But if they start an attack, they get hyper armor. And if they get hyper armor, you'll generally trade with them before you can flinch them out of anything. And that's one of the interesting things about the enemies in this game. When you hit them, you get hit stun, you get pushback, which is great. But when they start doing something, they are in charge, and there's no guarantee that you're going to flinch them. And something that's really funny in that regard is it's not always that way. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. There seems to be more going on under the hood. But the ultimate irony is if you attack Dracula, you know, the guy who's the big bad of this game, while he's doing an attack, you will interrupt it. Yet certain things you try and interrupt, and you either trade or it just keeps happening, which I don't really know what to make of that, but it is funny. I was talking about earlier, though, this notion of the things that this game did right, considering there was no template. And one of the things it does amazingly is its exploration, I think. The levels are big for the N64, and for Castlevania in particular when it comes to 3 dimensions, but they're not too big. And especially this level that we're on now, the villa is one of the most interesting levels in any video game I've played, because of the aspirations of it in this early days of gaming, and because of what it tries to do. And I don't think it's entirely successful, but I just think the concept is fantastic. So previously, we went through a forest that was quite linear in this version, and then we went through a tower, climbing a wall, which was also quite linear. Then you get here, and it opens up. And of course it doesn't open up like Skyrim would, because we're a long way away from that at this moment. We're still on Daggerfall, right? Which is probably even bigger than Skyrim, but more limited. Oh, and this is our first vampire too. Vampires are interesting in this game, because moving and fighting has a learning curve. And the biggest problem in Legacy compared to 64 is when you have your back to an enemy, Cornell will not turn around and attack them like Rindart used to do. So you can't just run away from people and then rely on the lock-on to shoot backwards. You have to wait for a whiff and then turn around and attack. And by the time you've done that, because Cornell has quite some weight to him, even though he is indeed faster than Rindart was, you can get hit. So the dance of fighting vampires is a knowledge check and an execution check, and if you mess it up, you're going to get hit because they have a lot of forward momentum when they do certain things. But there's a secret in the chandelier. There's quite a lot of secrets in this villa, actually, so keep an eye out for those. Really, really cool. But as I was saying, though, this segment is not linear in the same way the previous ones were, because you get to move around these zones, and there are areas that are superfluous. They don't serve a purpose, but you get to explore them to build this impression of this world. And then, of course, you have the legendary garden maze, which also adds to just the wealth of this stage, but also one of the biggest criticisms of Castlevania 64 that they've tried to make better in this game, and I just kind of wish they'd done something different. So if you don't know, guys, if you don't know this series, and when I say this series, I don't mean Castlevania, because there's a million of those games, and I don't know those, but I'm talking strictly 64, strictly 3D, strictly N64 territory here. The Garden Maze is a legendary segment in these games, and it's legendary for the wrong reasons. When I was younger, this segment used to scare me because it was so intimidating and so terrifying and really, really challenging. And what they've done in Legacy of Darkness to try and make it a bit better is they've redesigned it so you do explore here a bit more, and then they've changed the segment where you end up chasing after a small kid, and instead they've got you protecting a small kid. And I don't think they've made it better in that regard, because I think that the protecting Henry segment is particularly shit. But what they've done is they've let off the gas on how cranked the bad guys were. Something worth noting here as well, guys, if you're trying to do no damage, these little snakes can actually swim through the walls, and if they grab you, they will do damage. after they've grabbed you for a little time. I don't know if they do damage on contact. I would just reset. This is actually the first part of hard where I noticed that the game was a lot harder than it was on normal, because these towers are firing faster projectiles and they're more aggro, it feels like. And then the motorcycle guy, the enemies, it all just seemed a lot more steep than it was when I first went through here. And you'll notice I'm skipping things. I tried my best on this run, guys, to not skip stuff, but the little snakes kept grabbing me and they were pissing me off, because I did this about 5 or 6 times. And on normal, I did it first attempt. I thought this was going to be an easy sequence, but it's not. Same with this mudman here. See the little snakes? The snakes are why I'm skipping this. If they weren't there, I wouldn't be doing this. But when you first come here, you get to explore this zone, which is not something you really get to do in Castlevania 64, because you're constantly being harassed by an immortal Frankenstein monster with a chainsaw for an arm. And he is so fast and so stupid, it's crazy. It's really crazy. And to make matters worse on the original, that he has 2 immortal stone dogs with him, like the ones from bloody Ghostbusters. And what they do is, when you kill them, they stay down for a couple seconds and then they get back up and chase you. So the whole maze, and especially when you're a kid and you don't really know what you're doing, because games are different when you're younger, you don't have the same, deductive reasoning and understanding of patterns and pathfinding. So you run around this maze, for the love of God, trying to survive, and getting absolutely molested by these dogs that grab you, freeze you, so the giant guy can run up to you and smack you. And it was terrifying, it was horrifying, it was always very, very dark, like very, very difficult and dark times on the Castlevania 64 version. In Legacy of Darkness, they've made it easier, which is a good thing, I think. But they haven't made it better in a way that makes it more fun. They've made it easier, but they've also kind of made it annoying too. And it's an impossible situation to fix because it's such a legendary sequence. And ironically enough, the segment in Castlevania is not as bad as I remember it being as when I was a youngster. You can just kind of spam jump and get past everything without getting grabbed. And you can do it no damage, even on hard. But that being said, if you don't know what you're doing, you are going to have a miserable time. And for me, challenge is not about being miserable. It's not about being like, fuck this, I'm never doing this again. That means that something has gone wrong there. Something has been imbalanced and ineffectual in making something compelling for the player. Because fundamentally, we are problem-solving animals, right? We are looking to find a solution. And when we feel like we earn that solution, it's a very satisfying experience. This is interesting, because you get the storeroom key in here, but you don't have to go in the storeroom. It's entirely up to you if you do that or not. I love this room as well. I just love the details. There's a lot of things you can go up to in this game and examine, and it will give you a little description of what it is, but sometimes it will give you items. And there are different things to examine in this game than there were in Castlevania 64. And sometimes you'll get chickens, sometimes you'll get, jewels, sometimes you'll get gold. And in here there is a save point as well. And some of these statues you can go up to and examine and they'll give you something, but some of them are hard to do because they're next to things like save points. And I'm trying to do it here to kind of demonstrate it, but it might not be possible. Or maybe that's in Castlevania 64, I don't know. But there is certain interactions that happen in the villa that involve time. And I've not even talked about the time mechanic yet because it is so frequent in this game. And of course, as soon as I start talking about it, we fight another vampire in a particularly close encounter. This vampire looks really cool, and when you hit him, sometimes he falls down. He also likes to try and grab you. On normal, when I did my practice run, I found a strategy in here where if you jump on top of the bed, you can grab it, stand on top of it, and then you can just shoot him for free. And he ran into the bed trying to get me. On hard, when I tried to do that, he backed up and spat at me, which I thought was really cool. So, if you're looking for a cheesy strategy, you can body block with some furniture or get on the bed, but he can spit, and I didn't know that. But in here, we'll be talking to Henry's mother, and she's going to be setting up the next sequence, which is just another really cool moment because you get some exposition here. And especially if you're a Castlevania 64 guy, you'll remember that I think in this segment here you met Vincent and you were talking to the vampire hunter, and there's a whole relationship with Rosa and whatnot, and instead we've got this thing happening. So it's similar and familiar, but not quite the same. And it's those little nuances that makes it really, really sick. And I do lament some days that we never got another Castlevania 64 game, like, you know, Castlevania 64 2 or something. But at least we got this version, so we have two rather different versions of the same experience that went in somewhat different ways. Because then there's just a lot of game to play, and it's such a fun game to re-experience if you like it and if you've learned to play it. Because one of the things I think that is so kind of abrasive, the major friction that caused this game to have the opinions that some people have of it, I think, are that when you played Castlevania in the past, you could jump onto it and you would generally have an idea of what you were doing. Because you would run along the screen, you would attack with your whip, you would jump, you would crouch, you would, you know, pick up the hearts and then throw the axes and things. And you'd have success and fun, even if you were crap, which is very important to a game. But in this game, well, not necessarily Legacy, because it is a bit easier on that side, especially with Cornell. In Castlevania 64, when you jump into that game, the simple activity of moving and attacking is awkward. And it doesn't feel immediately satisfying or immediately fun. Like, you'll whip a few skeletons, they'll tank the hits, and then you'll just get hit or get knocked down or something, and then you're fighting the camera, and then you're getting annoyed. So your first experience with the game is quite negative. And I think that didn't do it any favours. And then when you get to the platforming, you don't know how to move, you don't know how to turn the camera correctly, you don't know how to jump and grab the ledges because you've not learned these things yet and you're still new. By the way, look at the frame rate right now. It's crazy to think that this segment, because the chainsaw guy is here, slows down this much with all these NPCs in this area. It feels really bad to play as well. Not a big fan. So you're going to fall off on the platforming and kill yourself and then go back to the start, and then you're going to have to fight the skeletons again, and then the whole thing is just going to feel really unsatisfying because it doesn't feel like you're a powerful Belmont. And people want to feel, you know, like that character that they played on those other games. And Castlevania 64 doesn't give you that. And don't get me wrong, if you were like I was as a kid, where when you liked something you played it regardless and then you learned to get good by just grinding and grinding and grinding, you were going to play it no matter what. And if you were someone who'd played a lot of N64 games, you knew that when you first turned them on, there was an adjustment period because the controls were different, every game governed things in different ways, and you just kind of inherited those skills and then applied them here and eventually learned what you were supposed to do. A piece of advice here, ladies and gentlemen, too. Be very careful of corners against this guy, because he takes them like rubber-banded AI. He can absolutely beam around corners with insane momentum and just whack you immediately. And in this instance, he doesn't whack us, he whacks Henry. And Henry on hard, I think, can take about 2 hits. But ideally, you don't want him to take any hits. And if you move too far away from him, he'll shout at you, you know, don't leave me! And if you do leave him, he runs all the way back to where you started. So take this really slow and just keep on turning back towards the guy and putting him down with a couple of attacks. This is slower and easier than the one in 64. The one in 64, if you know how to book it, you can do it really quickly. This one, not so much. But something that's really weird, when I was doing my practice run on normal, I didn't get any Cerberus in the maze, and I thought they took them out. So I was like, oh my god, they took them out, that's great, fuck that enemy. But it turns out that's not true. Depending on where you go, because I did get lost, depending on your route will dictate if you bump into any of the dogs. And right here, make sure you take him down, because on this corner there's going to be a dog. But he's not always here. Sometimes he's here, sometimes he's not. So make sure he's stunned, kill this guy, and as soon as you get to this door, you're done. And this is one of the more nerve-wracking moments. You can just go to it. I was being really, really, really patient here because I didn't want to do this again because I don't really like it. But as soon as you get to that, you get your cutscene and you've won. And the only fear now is if they populate the motorcycle skeleton and he shoots you. Because that can happen. Doesn't always happen, but sometimes it does. So do not get shot by the bloody sidecar skeleton man, who is amazing but also an asshole. Also, if you're wondering why I'm jumping like this, jumping is faster than standard movement in this game. It's faster than sliding too. Sliding's cool and can low profile some stuff, but jumping is always kind of what you want to do. There's also some hidden commands that add to what I was previously talking about, how when you first start playing Castlevania 64, it's not apparent about how you engage with the game, how you manipulate the camera, how you fight the enemies, and how you move, because it's tricky. And a lot of the times, even when you know what you're doing, it can be quite awkward. There are situations you get put in where you can't do what you want to do, and you have to fight against the limitations. And the more you spend time doing this, the easier it gets. But it's still a problem, you know. Always a problem. But there are these interesting command normals you can do in this game, but they're dictated by the direction that you're facing. So if I were to stand still right now and press left and A at the same time, I would do a side hop. And I think that these moves have a few iframes in them, because you can do them and not get hit. But then other times you do them, you do get hit, and I don't really know what that's about, but I think you might get iframes in certain parts of a jump. And you can hop left, you can hop back, you can hop right. They're kind of cool, but the problem with them is they're a bit finicky. So they feel like tilt attacks in Smash, where you lightly tilt the analog and press the button. And sometimes if you go to do it, you'll just do a normal move, or you'll just not have enough momentum and you'll get like a weird jump. Because this game does have momentum. And you'll notice it if you try and do a sprint into a slide. Sometimes you'll just power squat because you didn't sprint enough. And the reason why it has this momentum, this inertia, whatever you want to call it, is because if you lightly tap the analog forward without fully holding it, you can walk. And I never do that because it's one of those mechanics that I hate. I hate having to touch the controller like a little nipple to get some fine movement. It never feels good. And I don't understand why it wasn't just a toggle between walking and crouching or something, because then you could have had the precision over it, but you don't. So because of that ramp up time that your character has, which is another element that reminds me of a certain FromSoft game, you can get things that will impede you and will affect your movement. And just then we went into the Rose Garden, and if you don't know, guys, you have to be there at a certain time. I think it's like 6 p.m. in this game. And what happens is the flowers in front of you turn red. And when they turn red, you get an item. It's a key for this location. And now we've got the rose brooch. We can take it all the way back to the start of the mansion, believe it or not, in the graveyard where we were solving that puzzle. And then if you go to the top, you can transform it into the next piece of the motif that we need to move forward. And how fucking cool is that, dude? The Villa is such a legendary stage that is ruined by the garden maze because everybody hates it. And they hate it for good reason, because you are rushed by an enemy that is far too capable and annoying, and he makes everyone's first playthrough absolutely fucking miserable. That being said, it's not as bad as people make it out to be. Here are the motorcycle guys, by the way. I love these dudes. In this game, when you press the right button while you're attacking, it tends to center the camera on the enemy, or just center the camera in general, and then you get a better lock-on shot. So when they're running past me, if you're wondering how I'm doing that, I'm just pressing the R and then attacking. In Castlevania 64, if you do that, it gets weird. Everything kind of like locks on in this odd way, and it doesn't feel right. So I don't recommend it as much there, because the camera in this game is better in some ways, because you can toggle between action and you can toggle between boss. Whereas in 64 there are 3, but they're all shit, and they all seem to do the same thing, and the camera's always spinning. And this game, when the camera starts spinning and you have to do platforming, is a nightmare, dude. There's a stage with Reinhardt where you go underground, and there's these spider ladies, and there's poison water everywhere, where as you're doing fine platforming, the camera just pirouettes. And it's the dumbest thing. Like, they needed to just leave it alone, dude. And it's one of the biggest criticisms of the game, because people think that the platforming in Castlevania 64 is bad. It's not. Especially in this version, where they cleaned up some of the stuff. The platforming is actually really good, in as much as it is platforming with no assistance. The only help you get is his grab, which the detection on the grabbing in this game is great. Because as long as you hold A near it, you will tend to get it, which is what it should be for me. I hate those games, and it happens in lots of modern games. How many times in Uncharted 4 have you jumped towards something, Nathan's been bang on it, and you've just gone, pew, and died, and he didn't grab it? Why didn't he grab it? Guess what? Cornell would have fucking grabbed it, and this game's 26 years old. Why is it that he can grab it and Nathan can't? I will never get the answer, right? But it happens. These systems, every so often, they fail. And if they fail you a lot, you get a bad experience. You can get a bad experience in any platformer because of mechanics such as that. In this, though, once you have an understanding of what's expected of you, once you have an understanding of how to move the camera, the platforming becomes a lot more pleasurable because there's 20 years of platforming becoming so lobotomized you don't have to do anything. Like, Ubisoft have single-handedly absolutely cleansed every skill-based and skill-expressive feature in modern platforming as they fucking could, dude. You have to play indie games now to get anything close to that. Things like Celeste, you know, things like Super Meat Boy, such and such. There's lots of great games to mention where the platforming is incredibly skill-based and precise. Most modern platforming is yellow paint dribbled fucking everywhere with weird auto mantles, auto grabbing, auto animations, and it's almost like a loading screen from a Tony Hawk where you've skated through one of those corridors and nothing happened. Here, it's not like that, guys. This is, for better and for worse, might not be your thing, you might not think it's done well, this is platforming. And I really appreciate it, and I appreciate it as somebody who does not like platforming. I'm not a big guy. All my platforming love comes from the 64. That's where I played the collectathons, that's where I played all the classic ones, that's where I played this. And I really, really do think that there's a charm here that I didn't expect that I would enjoy as much. I was kind of curious to see how well this game would feel with my modern mind. Because I knew nostalgia was going to carry me a lot, but I wasn't certain if I was going to have the same experience, and I'm happy that I did. I actually think I enjoyed it more playing it now than I did when it first came out. Legacy of Darkness, not Castlevania 64. 64 for me is a very special game. It reminds me of so many things. It's just such a time capsule of just awesome video game goodness. And it's funny too, because I had a friend in those days who got the game before I did and was the man who motivated me to get it. And I went to his house and he was playing it and he showed me the game. The motherfucker, dude. He showed me the Dracula fight. Can you imagine? This is what friends are like back in the day, dude. Like, this guy... Oh, I've got this super cool game, you need to see it. It's literally the first Dracula fight at the end of the game. Legendary fight. Oh, speaking of legendary fights, this is the fight against Giles, right? This is my favourite fight in the game. I absolutely love it. I wish I could figure out how to mod this game and give this dude some more attacks. Hell, I'd give every boss more attacks. I'd love to be able to change the enemy placements, change some values. I'd love to make Renon sell things so that you can sell things to him as opposed to just buying things. I'd love to change the drop rates. Oh, I'd do so much with this game because I fucking love it. But I love that fight because it's just this super fast vampire darting around doing all this shenanigans, and then you just try your best to beat his ass. And he's not very difficult, but that's kind of Castlevania 64 in a nutshell. It's not really that difficult. The hardest thing is learning to play it. However, there are 3 segments in this game that I've mentioned where the difficulty spikes. The first one is the start of the villa with the Cerberus. Second one is the Tower of Science. And then the final one is, of course, the final boss. The final boss, ladies and gentlemen, is 2 bosses in a row, and it's all the difficulty. If you're going to be doing a no damage run of this on hard, that will be where all your resets are pretty much, because it's just incredibly frustrating. But this is a new level, this. This is a Cornell exclusive, if we don't count Henry, stage, and it's called The Outer Wall. I like the music on this stage, and I actually quite like this stage now, but when I was first coming back, I thought it was a touch annoying. And it's just because of these moments. So, in a few years from now, God of War is going to come along, and it's going to make these moments revolutionized, because it's going to make them fast. It's going to make them somewhat skippable, because you can jump on them and make them quicker, but it's going to up the pace. It did the same thing with pushing blocks, which Zelda managed to make very slow, because that's just where we started. And then God of War came along, Kratos was so angry, so capable, he made it streamlined, he made it fun. And there's a difference between Ubisoft coming along and making platforming, hold towards a building and hold a trigger and the guy just shoots up it like a spider and you don't do anything. There's a difference between that and making engagements quicker. Whenever you dangle in this game and you have to shimmy, it is the most laboriously stupid thing ever because it is not fun. And you compare it to this, where I'm sliding under blades, which is really fast and slick and cool. It's a no contest. No one wants to shimmy impossibly slow, ever. And why they thought that that was what people wanted to do, I just can't fathom it. And this game has these really cool shortcuts where you can do a jump, and as you're falling, hold the jump button and grab a ledge to break your fall, and you can come up with all kinds of little sequence breaks and fast ways through certain stages doing this. They have a mechanic like that, and yet they want you to do this weird sidling slow-ass 10 seconds of nothing, and I think it kills the pacing of this stage, because all the other puzzles, they keep you mobile, they keep you jumping, they keep you precise. And if I fall, guys, on any of these movements, they're not going to save me. There's not going to be a barrier. I'm going to fall and die. And the game's going to be like, well, you're dead. I hope you saved. And that's just the way of it, you know? But that's what makes it more fun. There are stakes. And the stakes help, you know? Ironically enough, there are no stakes in this game, are there? Vampires are no stakes. But like, this is a segment here, watch this. So if you drop there, I drop all the way down to that, I grab that, and then you can go to the side here, grab that, drop down from here, grab that, and then you're at the bottom. Like, how cool was that? And you don't have to do it like that, guys. You can do it on any of those areas. It's very dynamic, all considered, for platforming at this age. And now we get the Indiana Jones moment with the boulder. Only this one is multiplied, and because it's on hard, it feels like these boulders move quicker than they do on normal. Any trap like this, you want to be really careful. Of all the areas in this zone for me to take damage when I recorded this, it was in this room, and I was really salty about it, because I felt like I'd got past it, and the game said no. Some of the hitboxes are incredibly big, and you need to contend with that. But there's a couple of mechanics I've not talked about yet, so I'm going to try and mention them now. So I'm sure you've noticed in the top left that there's a clock constantly ticking. And right now, it is night time on that clock. This entire game is affected by what time it is, which is crazy to think about, and I don't know if this is one of the first times I'd seen this idea in a game, or if it's something that had been handled before. But when you fight monsters at night, they have more HP. They are effectively a little bit more dangerous because they get a passive buff, because they are creatures of said night. And what wonderful music they make, right? However, if you fight them during the day, they are weaker, because it's not their time, you know? They don't get the field bonus in Duelist Kingdom, and you can beat them up. So what happens is there are tools in Castlevania called sun cards and moon cards that let you manipulate time in a very Ocarina of Time-esque way. And you can choose to move time forward in order to get a disadvantage or an advantage. And for a boss such as the Harpy here, I don't know if this boss is getting a benefit from it being nighttime, but they probably are. And can't say that you'll notice on this one, because I like this fight, because it's quite dynamic and it looks good. But it's one of the easier fights in the game. She's going to come and dive bomb now, but you can just kind of jump away from it. And here is the targeting not being my best friend. If that was Castlevania 64, I would have attacked the boss because the lock-on was on her, but I was facing the wrong way. And that's one of the biggest hurdles you'll have to get used to when you're learning to play this game. Trying to orient Cornell to face the enemy you're attacking is imperative in being successful. Also be careful near the edges here, because I think you can fall off. I came very close then to killing myself. You can kill yourself during the death boss and during the Renon boss, so I don't know if it's like Renault or something, some French way of saying it, but you know who I mean, the merchant. Who I've not explained either, so I probably should. So yeah, the time affects lots of things. It also affects things in a way that definitely reminds me of the FromSoft legacy nowadays, with how punishing they are. As we get into this zone and hear this song, And this song is one of my favourite Castlevania songs because I heard it, I think, in Circle of the Moon. But turns out that's not the first place it played. It played in a game I haven't even played because I'm a fake Castlevania fan. On the topic of time, when you play the game, time passes. You can manipulate that by using the cards that you're going to see me use in this zone because the doors are dictated by a changing time. However, if you spend too long on your adventure, and GameFAQs says it's 16 days, and I don't know how hard or easy that is to achieve because I don't think I've ever actively been able to do it. But if you take too long to get to the end of the game, you will not get the good ending. You will not fight the true form of Dracula, and you will fight a unique boss. But I think this only happens in Reinhardt's campaign in this game and in Castlevania 64. And the idea is you're being punished for not playing the game right, which is the most Souls thing I can think of. And you get completely trapped out of getting the ending that you're probably looking for and getting the experience that you're looking for. Because in Castlevania 64, you fight Vincent, who is a vampire hunter. And the idea is, you won't meet him in this, you'll not see him in this run. But Vincent goes and fights Dracula because you took too long, so he gets there first. And because he's not as capable as we are, sadly, because he's, past his prime or what have you, he loses. And Dracula turns him into a vampire. So when you get to the end of the game, you'll notice as you're walking up the keep, up the stairs that lead to those different chambers, there's a chamber that has Renan in it where he talks about the contract, and you're like, oh, there's that guy. And then you hit a room and no one's in it. It's empty. And I'm sure you've probably thought to yourself, like, what's the point in this? What is this? Well, that room is the trigger for when you spend too long in the game and get the bad ending. That's the room that triggers Vincent. That's the room that triggers all of that. And, like, think how mean that is. That there's a time mechanic, and then they make you go out of your way to manipulate that time mechanic, and then they punish you for using too much time. It's just perfect. Turns out, though, because we all heard about it back in the day, because a lot of these games came with walkthroughs. A lot of the magazines at the time came with additional booklets where they had written walkthroughs, and this was at a time even before GameFAQs in many ways, even though that was definitely there if you were privileged enough to have the internet. But a lot of the walkthroughs back in the day weren't the best, and you can see that even now if you go on GameFAQs. Then again, if you go on fucking YouTube, half the walkthroughs are dog shit. It's insane, half the walkthroughs are playthroughs, and the guys, it's a blind playthrough, and they can't even play the fucking game, because obviously it's their first time. Madness, but I won't talk about that. I've been talking about that for a decade. But you were reliant on these tools to help you if you got stuck, or a friend who knew something, or even a friend who had one of these tools. So we all knew that if you took too long, you fought Vincent. But truth be told, I don't think I ever noticed that I never fought him. I never took that long, because it's actually quite hard to take that long, to take 16 days. And it's one of those things where if you want to do it, you've got to intentionally do it. So if you're interested in this, best thing to do, guys, is to buy Sun and Moon cards, get to the clock tower at the end, get to the final save before you hit that staircase, and then just burn all your cards. And that way, if you spend enough money, you'll get the Renan fight, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, and you'll also get the bad ending if that's what you're going for. And then you can do that, see what it's all about, experience it, and then roll the save back, and then continue on and do it right. And then you can get the full experience without needing multiple playthroughs. Unless you want to play it multiple times, in which you should absolutely do that, because the game's great. But just then, guys, did you see that scroll on the floor? I've kind of neglected this, but it's important. Because it's really cool, and it's another one of those just incredibly punishing and almost malicious mechanics that makes me think of Souls. So, there's a merchant in this game called Renan. I fleetingly mentioned him. He turns up every so often in these scrolls, and he establishes very quickly, from the fact that he's floating with a devil tail, that he is a demon, right? He also talks about a contract, and then you get to buy things from him. And in the original Castlevania 64, his prices are very low, so you can buy a million things. In this game, his prices are a bit more expensive, but fundamentally, what happens is, if you spend over, I think it's 30,000 gold, 25,000, 30,000, somewhere in that range, on your adventure, when you get to that area I was just talking about with the room with Vincent, the room before it has Renan come to you and say, well, that's it. That's the end of the contract. You didn't read it, did you? And then he explains to you that there was a clause in the contract where if you spent too much gold, you forfeit your soul. And when that happens, the merchant who has been helping you for the entirety of the adventure starts to kill you. And it's one of those gacha moments as a kid that everybody heard about and was terrified by. Because you were scared that you were going to pay too much to this guy who was the guy giving you all the beef and the chicken to keep you alive. So there was this tenuous balance to get through the game without pissing this guy off. And imagine that as a young kid knowing about this, right? You're trying not to piss the merchant off, but he's the only way you can buy the items because you're using too many because you're not very good at the game. At the same time, you're trying not to burn too much time and too much sand in the hourglass because you know if you do that, you're going to get the bad ending and fight that other guy who's a nice man. This whole thing is playing on your mind as you're trying to get through this very punishing game. And then once again, it's kind of funny looking back and having experienced it again now as a bit more mature than I was at the time. Much like with Vincent and wasting all that time before you get to Dracula, spending 25,000+ gold with Renon is kind of hard to do. And to give you an example, guys, I wanted to do it in this run because on normal I had enough money. And on normal I wasn't grinding at all. I was just exploring, I was killing all the enemies, I must have got lucky or something, or maybe you get less money on hard, which is my current theory. But I ended up having enough money to buy from him and get him and do his thing. On this run, I get 21 grand. So I'm like 9 grand off worst case scenario. So what I ended up doing is I ended up using the cheat engine to give me money. Because I was at the end of the game, there was no more treasure, I couldn't find anybody to farm, I was kind of screwed out of it, but I wanted to show it for the purposes of this run. And if you don't know, because you're not really missing out on much, Renon is a palette swap of death. That's all he is. He does the exact same things. Obviously his model's different, but his attacks are the same. So if you've ever played the game with Reindart and you've come up against the legendary creature that's in most Castlevanias, you've already fought him. He flies around, he fires these fires at you instead of scythes. They work generally the same. And then he does this thing with fish that come out of these portals, and that's all it really is. So the fight itself is kind of underwhelming, but it's cool that it exists, and to me, it's the mentality of it, it's the concept. I love the idea that this lifeline is lethal if you manipulate it too much. And truth be told, I actually think it's a bit meaner than even Demon's Souls mechanically. So you could say that Castlevania had, harder balls, more steel balls than even From Software in their most evil rendition of their future systems that would go on to change the world. But then again, Castlevania was always, hard as nails and a really, really respectable and cool franchise. These enemies, if you don't know, are just those gold armoured fellows, but they're invisible, so all you can see is their weapons. But one of the cool things about the combat in this game is that you do flinch people, you do stun them, you can almost consistently keep enemies at bay with Cornell because he's so powerful. And then another few mechanics that have that Soulsian tint to them, and almost certainly will have inspired some aspects of it, they must have for me, is things like the vampirism. So when you fight vampires in this game, they can grab you, and if you don't mash the buttons and get them off you, they can turn you into a vampire. And of course, vampires in Castlevania are a massive part of the legacy and the story and the canon. And in this game, I don't know if it actually happens in Legacy because that's never happened, but in Castlevania 64, when this happens, not only do you look like Ryu in Ninja Gaiden at the end of the first game, where you get all messed up and jacked and have the grey skin and everything, or the blue skin, you look like that, and you can't use your primary weapon. So instead of being able to throw the magic or whatever this attack is that Cornell has, you have to use your claws, and it severely limits your potential, which I think is a really punishing and cool idea. But again, it's punishment for being bitten. And you can get poisoned too, because you get spat at by enemies and they will put status effects on you. And some of these status effects are kind of tricky to heal too, which all adds to this area of the game kind of whooping your ass. And it's awesome. It's really, really respectable. But there's one more mechanic where everything we've just talked about kind of gets completely trivialized because of just how unbelievably powerful it is. So I wanted to keep it as a bit of surprise for people that don't know this game, but I've mentioned it a few times, and I've already kind of given it away, and I'm going to give it away here as we enter the Tower of Ruins, which is another new level for this version of the game. This is exclusive to Cornell, and I don't hate this stage, I just think they should have done more with it because there's not real combat in this location. And I'm one of those crazy people that likes the combat of Castlevania 64, so I would like more of that, please. Whereas this is just some crystal maze, follow this path, try not to fall down, and press 3 switches and get the hell out of dodge kind of moment. And what happens is if you follow the correct path, which is what I just did not do, because that right there that's blocking the way is going to move when we press these buttons that are coming up. If you hit the buttons in the right order and you jump across the falling floors, you can do this without ever falling down into the antechamber, and it's a lot quicker, so I recommend that you do that. And it's an interesting distraction, but it's not my favourite stage. But do you see how in the top right, guys, I have my 3 axes and I have my 99 jewels? It's quite strange that this game doesn't use the old system. Not entirely certain why that's the case, but instead of hearts, we have jewels, and they work exactly the same. It is quite iconic in this game because it's the same as the save crystal too. Save crystal's that white with that edge of like teal, whereas these are just blood red jewels, and they power up your ability to use your sub-weapons. But there's more than just that, ladies and gentlemen, because if you press left on the majestic trident of the N64 controller, you will turn into a werewolf. And you look really cool when you do this as well. And additionally, you are incredibly powerful. You are powerful like you wouldn't believe. And it was my intention, when I made this run, to only use this ability against Dracula's final form, because I wanted it to be like a sense of escalation, like something from Dragon Ball Z, where at the end, where all the cards are down and we've really got to perform, we transform and then we beat ass, right? That's what I wanted it to be. And then I started doing that fight and realised just how frustrating that checkpoint was and how annoying the no-reg is, because the damage in this game is very strange. And then I ended up using it for the first form as well. But I did not realise just how strong that mode was. I knew it was strong because I didn't used to use it as a kid. It was so strong, to give you an idea of how ridiculous it is, even though being a werewolf is amazing. But on the first phase of Dracula, when you activate wolf form, I think you kill him in like 3 hits. Normally, on hard, you have to attack him like 8 times. So it turns a fight that might be a minute and a half, depending on how much he trolls you and how much the no-reg bullshits you, turns it into a 10 to 15 second fight if you get a good pattern, which is really useful because the second phase has no checkpoint, so you have to kill Dracula every time you want to fight pure ultimate Dracula or whatever he's called. So that gets really annoying, as you can imagine, because it's actually very hard to dodge, and we're going to talk a lot about that coming up because I'm not going to have a chance in the fight, it's too fast. But the biggest problem with the werewolf is you can't turn it off. So if I activate it right now with 99 jewels and the jewels tick down to maintain it, it won't stop until it goes to 0 and burns all my resources. And when I first bought this game back in the day, I was so mad by this. And it's so funny to me that I've not changed much in that regard. Like, even then, the moment I tried to turn it off because I didn't want to waste it and I wanted to save it for important shit and I couldn't do it, I just couldn't understand why they'd done it like that. And I still don't. And please let me know in the comments, guys, if you think this is better, because I never saw a good reason for why we couldn't turn it off. And the only thing I've ever since then come across is the people that say, oh, they said in the cutscene at the start that you can't control it. Like, oh, come on. Come on, guys, are we really going with that? And admittedly, I've been watching some Castlevania stuff while I've been editing this and getting ready for this commentary. And I've seen some people talk about how it does lead to some interesting pathing, because what happens is when you go into a cutscene, it deactivates it. Oh, this is me showing you the axes against the fleamen. See how good that was? If you lock onto them and throw them, the axe will always find them. It's really crazy. Normally I just kill them anyway, but these are the only enemy in the game where I'm not confident that I'm not going to get hit, because they have a tendency to auto-dodge everything and then jump into you and contact damage you, which is really annoying. But when you watch a cutscene, it takes you out of wolf mode. So what you can do is you can route the game so that every single boss fight that has a cutscene you can use wolf form for and then come out of it safely without burning your gems. And you can turn it into this interesting setup, which I do think is cool, and I do think is quite, you know, clever and quite enjoyable for somebody to figure out if that's your bag. But that is come around because of the limitations of a system that should have never been that way. So for me, I think that it should have been a toggleable ability, and they should have just made it so that when you activate it, it takes maybe 10 gems, and then when you deactivate it, it takes maybe 10 gems, and have there be a bit of a punishment for doing that, but nothing too severe, you know? I mean, if I gave it some thought, I could probably come up with a whole system that governs it in a much better way to make it more risk versus reward, because the problem that exists is apparent from the very first time you do it. It's too good. Like, it's too bloody good, and it's too easy to keep your gems high, and it's not that, like, heavy on the cost either. You can comfortably use that form, get everything done, and then have it back for the next time you need it. And the sad thing is, it leads you to just neglecting it and not using it, which I think is lame because it's so awesome. But at the same time, when you activate it, it's too good. So what are you going to do? You can't really win. But when you're playing, guys, activate it all the time if you want. But for me, because it is so good, and because I am looking to make it a bit more challenging, outside of doing a very bespoke challenge run, which my brain's kind of been coming up with, there's no reason not to use it unless you're just one of those people that wants to kind of engage a bit more. And I've been trying to think of what would be the most challenging way to play this game outside of, you know, single segment and stuff, because that's just not for me. And if you're not aware, guys, this is segmented. I've been doing save to save. I'm not trying to come across like I turned the game on, beat the whole thing without getting hit, and then turned it off in one sitting, because that's just not my playstyle, and it cheapens the people that do that by even being in the same pantheon of players that get mentioned when that shit gets brought up. And I'm not a big fan of people getting credit for shit they've not done right. As long as you're honest with what you're doing, that's all that matters. And I'm going to be honest with this part here, I think it's fucking terrible. I love this game, and I love Castlevania 64, but it doesn't mean there aren't segments that I just wonder what was going on, and this is one of them. So every time I'm jumping here, guys, I'm jumping over parts of the floor that are going to fall away. And in this game's defense, there is a frame, or two maybe, where when something's falling, you can actually jump off it. And I say a frame or two, you can be on it the whole time and jump off it, and that's okay. But I don't know if it's because the emulator runs at the wrong speed. I certainly think the visual clarity on this segment looks worse on emulator because it's harder to distinction what's going to fall from what isn't. On the N64, it seems a lot clearer with the divisions of the geometry. But it feels like they fall just a bit too fast. And there's a few things like that on emulator that's probably not running correctly, because the game is running at an incorrect speed. There's no two ways about it. Especially on the final boss, dude. The moves the final boss do, if you watch someone on N64 do that fight, the game is like 8 FPS because it's slowing down so much, but because it's slowing down, it's giving you more time to do things. But when you're playing it at full 60 and it's ultra cranked, everything is moving at such a pace that the game ceases to function in the intended way. And what it means is you have to come up with creative solutions. And one of the creative solutions is to slow the game down using something like RevaTuner. You can drop the frames to 25 and you will have a much easier time because everything's moving at a speed that's more realistic. But where's the fun in that, right? So instead, you bang your head against it for 40 minutes coming up with the most obtuse, evasive strategies that sometimes work and sometimes don't. But I would have no problem with this stage if the platforms that fell made sense, but at times they feel very spiteful. Certain platforms are even near a save point where it's just, it exists to waste your time, that room. And I don't like it. I like it just to be a little bit more honest and a little bit more fun. Like this zone here, I think is way better, even if you don't really do anything. And the idea here is, around this entire circle here, there are statues that are teaching you these zodiac symbols. And each one of them is the one that you're supposed to choose. So you have to memorize all these symbols and choose between two each time. One of them is a symbol on the wall, one of them is not. If you know the symbols, you know the jumps every time. Or you could do what I did, because I'm stupid and a caveman, and I just fucked it up until I got the order and then memorized the order. And that'll be it. And I'm certain that a lot of people who play this game will do the same thing, because this is the type of thing that people look up, you know, because they're not really interested in it. But you can solve it, and every puzzle in this game can be solved by looking in the environment, which I think is really nice. None of them are as like obtuse or as awkward as something like a Dino Crisis, because they're not going for that. But there's still enough to engage your brain and be like, ooh, I see what's happening here, and I really appreciate that. But that's the end of the Tower of Ruin. The weakest tower in the game for me, it's just kind of lame. And then we hit the Tower of Science. So this checkpoint here, ladies and gentlemen, this is about half the difficulty of the run. And on hard difficulty, everything moves quicker. And it really, really fucks this up. It really does. The boxes can be destroyed if you attack them. The hurt boxes, or hurt blocks, or whatever they're called, they can be destroyed as well. These electric spewing side traps cannot be broken, sadly. And I'd like this segment a lot more if they could. Although a lot of the challenge would go away if you could break them. And the main difficulty is that there's no save point until you do all of these little challenges now. And you'll notice the conveyor is pushing towards us, so it makes it hard to move forward. These are an inconvenience, these ones. When the conveyor goes the other way, they're difficult. And they're difficult because they slingshot you. And again, I get the feeling that this is moving at the wrong speed, because at the top, the conveyor is moving so fast that you can get past all the traps and it will fire you off, and you cannot counter movement and jump or anything and go against it. It just moves too quick. And if you've done this recently, guys, on hardware and it still does that, that might be hard specific. But this here, this is really hard, this bit. Because right here, if you mess that slide up, it's too fast to recover from because everything is moving so stupidly quick. And I get really lucky here. I shouldn't have done that. I should have waited for the double block and then moved and jumped, but I kind of just YOLO'd it, and then the save point is here. What you've just witnessed doesn't look like much, but I can promise you, ladies and gentlemen, that was the hardest part of the game outside of a boss fight by far. And there's a segment coming up too, which, until you have an idea of what's going on, is also going to be incredibly problematic, because the Tower of Science, they have changed from the first game, and in many ways, you could say they've made it worse, I think. Same with the Tower of Sorcery. It doesn't look anywhere near as good on this game, and it's a lot shorter, which is interesting. Because the Tower of Sorcery is one of those weird ones where you only access it on carry, and I was never a big fan of playing as carry in 64. I always preferred Reinhardt. And I think it would be nice if you could play the other campaign as Cornell, because Cornell is so different than the other characters. He's got a lot of mobility, a lot of capability, an incredible amount of damage. And this segment here, you can run past these turrets. I didn't want to run past the enemies though, because I wanted to show you the game, I wanted to show you the fighting and everything, and of course, certain circumstances there's not really much you can do, but for these ones you can engage with them. And one of the things I really appreciate about Legacy of Darkness, especially when you play it like this, is the balance on how quickly people die is really nice. So never throw the axes until you've got a lock on, or you'll just end up throwing them in whichever way you're facing, and you'll end up wasting the jewels. This room is really interesting, because there's two cheeky ways to do this. You can climb on top of them like this, which is the way that I've always done it, or you can turn the camera. Apparently, I read this recently after I'd done this segment, if you look to the other wall where everything is facing and those guns aren't on camera, they don't shoot. And I've never tried that, but it sounds like something that a video game would do. So if you're in the neighborhood, guys, and you're wanting a different way through that area, maybe try that. But what they want you to do is they want you to navigate a maze of lasers while moving between those barriers, and it's kind of annoying. But speaking of annoying, so this segment here on normal is quite tricky, but it's not too bad. On hard, this segment is legitimately annoying, because everything fires so quickly, and everything is just unrelentingly irksome. And what you end up doing is you're going to get shot a million times until you start realising when to go and when not to go. And the timings of things, because it's all timing. and sliding. And if you could just drop down with a cheeky ledge grab here, which is absolutely possible, I just couldn't make it work, you could probably get to the floor and then backtrack effortlessly without doing this. But I found the best way to do this was to just hop onto this one and then jump directly forward here and then climb up on that particular platform. Every movement I made, guys, in that room, as strange as it might have seemed if you know that room, was made to manipulate the people shooting at me. Because they're all doing it, and this is the checkpoint, you know, you have to do all that room, come all the way back before you can segment anything. And there's a couple of secrets in this area too. There's flea men through this door, and they actually hit me on the other side of the door. So the reason I'm doing this is because of the game was being a cheeky bastard. So just wallbang them. Cornell's projectile does go through geometry sometimes, especially when you're close enough. But the secrets on this stage involve the panels. There's a lot of control panels knocking around, and if you examine them, you can get stuff from them. And then we have quite an annoying fight here as well. So there are turrets on each of the points of this. Is it a hexagon, this room? And what happens is that when you attack them a few times, they die. And I think what the devs wanted you to do, they wanted you to kill the turrets, get a little bit of a break, attack the crystal, turrets come back, kill the turrets, and then go kill the crystal, right? But if you come here and you throw axes facing forward, you just hit the boss and you don't have to engage with the turrets or anything, or even ever be in danger. So if you do like a no sub-weapon version of this fight, you'll have to engage with it. And all you do, guys, is kill all the turrets until you get to the walkway, and then walk into the walkway, attack, 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 walk out, and then the boss will try and do something and stop, and then attack, 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 and then I think it's a laser that tries to shoot at you to protect the boss. And you just keep baiting the laser and you can do it that way. But this is much faster, much easier, and there's one of the secrets right there, guys. By touching the panel, you can get some gold on that one. And because we use so many axes, we're going to go through the room and get them back. And there's so many resources that we don't have to worry. There it is. We've got 99 again. And it's the only time you'll see me use the axes because they're just not getting used. It does seem a little strange to me, though, that the axe is so much stronger than everything else in this game. I don't know why they decided to do that. Obviously, in Castlevania 64... Holy Water is nuclear, and the axe is pretty good there. But I did a full campaign in this with level 3 cross, and it just didn't seem to be all that good. And I would prefer if all of the sub-weapons at level 3 would be a bit stronger, but what are you going to do? But here we go, ladies and gentlemen, the Duel Tower. The tower that ruins the naming convention. And a stage that's been changed since the original. Lots of revisions of these stages coming up. This one's interesting too, because can you see how the roof is closing in? So if you take too long on these fights, the roof will crush you. That was the central gimmick of this place back in the day. And it is indeed still intact. But Cornell does so much damage that you're never really at risk of it happening. And then you can come back out here and then quickly save and then reset for the next part. But there's the roof coming down. And this is a sequence of fights in a row. And most of them are absolutely fine if you know how to fight in the game. But one of them has an awkward piece of platforming before it, and then a rather punishing setup, which makes it very difficult, and needlessly difficult too. But here's one of the werewolves. So werewolves in this game are cream puffs compared to Castlevania 64. All they really do is that, but they do some really interesting movement too. So if you watch when I turn direction, sometimes he'll run with me. See how he's running parallel there? They input read what you're doing, and then they run with you. And it's very noticeable when you change direction too. They don't do it all the time, but every so often it's like their programming's trying to cut you off. And when he dies, he drops a ton of gold, which is really nice. Especially if you're trying to save up for things. I wish you could do more things with the money, I really do. The money's so sick to me. Can you imagine if you could just keep getting upgrades and it just kept getting more powerful and more powerful and more powerful? That'd be so cool. These platforms sink, by the way, too. So be very careful on them. You do have time to do shit, but you don't have enough time to mess around too much. And these are high-low, these platforms. So you can't duck under both of them. And be very careful in this stage, because I thought this stage was fine on normal. On hard, everything that spins, all of these traps, they spin faster. and it just makes it way worse. And this segment's tougher too, because this enemy fires a projectile, Cornell wants to lock onto the projectile, and it makes it really, really difficult to challenge the monster spawning them. And the gimmick with the skull heads is that you can hit their projectile and hit them at the same time. So the safest thing to do when you're on that guy is to just be close to him where he doesn't do his proximity breath, and then just attack his projectile hitting him. If done correctly, you neutralize them, and you could do that all the way in the original, which was really, really cool. These are interesting as well. I'm curious why the blades on these were textured and flat textured and not actually modelled. Would there be too many polygons if they were to actually model those to make them look like teeth? Because they model the spikes in the underground waterway level that Carrie plays. So this is a really interesting one as well. This is a Minotaur of some description in his little gimp suit. When he does his charge up, if you slide towards the end of his charge, you can make him run into the walls and then get free punishes on him, and this is just a spacing game. The thing I like the most about this stage in this game is every fight has a solution that is movement based, and I really appreciate that. But the thing with it is it's very particular too. If you run and slide too soon in this animation, he will track you and just hit you. So you have to make sure you're doing it at the last moment. And these skills that you're learning here are going to be really useful when we get to the final boss. Because the final boss's moveset in the second phase is all about misdirection, it's all about timing, and it's all about spacing. And it's very, very difficult to put it all together and do it without getting clipped. And it's made even worse by the fact every time you get struck by that lightning, which is incredibly tricky to dodge, you have to kill Dracula again to get back and get hit by the lightning again. And some of these dodges are so precise, they don't look like much, but when you try and do them, you're going to get hit. And it's just the way of the world. And it's based on positioning, and something I've learnt by just banging my head against it for a while is that a lot of the attacks are based on the direction that you are facing, it feels like. And that kind of targeting information can be really, really invaluable because it can help you do things. This is the bit you have to do every time this next boss hits you, which is really annoying because this boss coming up, it's not even the boss that's hard, it's the room. Because you're in a very small room with a very big man who likes to bang the ground, and there's lava that you can step into, and the camera loves to rotate. If the camera stayed in this perspective, it would be fine. But when it rotates, everything goes bad because it's scary. But what you do is if you run towards him and you slide past his left hand, you will dodge his really quick uppercut, and if he does the stomp, you can just keep moving and space it. If he lays down like this, it's the best pattern because you can get the most damage, but he doesn't always do that. Just be careful. You can jump the shockwave, but you can also space it. That's the most important thing though. Knowing that you can just run past him and slide is really good, but if you run against his big arm, if you run towards his hand, you will get hit. It only works on his offhand. And of course, if you're struggling with any of this, just turn into a wolf. If you turn into a wolf, you'll kill him in 3 hits. You don't have to fight anything. Like, I kind of want to go through the game using only the claws. Because the cool thing about the claws is you can drive by people with them. You can claw during sliding attacks, and because sliding attacks are so fast, you can just keep going zip, zip, zip. And I mentioned earlier on that the friend who got me into this Castlevania, who was the one who kind of inspired me to get it, I should say, because I was always into Castlevania, I just never owned them. When he was on Dracula, one of the strategies that I watched him do was, instead of jumping and attacking Dracula in the face, which is what he should have been doing, but you know, we were kids, he was sliding and attacking him with the sword. And it's one of those things where it's like, that's an interesting thing to do if you know this game. And I do it now, but I do it now for swag more than damage, because you don't do as much damage and you can't multi-hit with the sword, it doesn't feel like, on him. And there are a few moves. That right there, guys, was my analog. I was trying to pick something up, I threw an axe because it confused the input. It does that a few times. And then, of course, the Tower of Execution. This is another one of those stages that's been sped up, basically. And I just think this stage works a lot better on normal, because when it's this fast, it's kind of hard to keep up with it. It just feels like everything's doing its own thing. And luckily it's not too difficult because it's just all environmental challenges. But I just don't think the flow feels as satisfying. Because one of the things I really like about Castlevania 64 is it is a bit of a slow game. It's a bit more methodical. And I've said it a few times in this video and undoubtedly pissed somebody off because it's going to. But the reason I do compare this to one of the things that I think has inspired the Souls series in the way that it is, it's because I see a lot of that slowness and that methodical nature that was present in Demon Souls and Dark Souls. After that, that went away. You know, everything got faster, everything got more character action-y, but there's something very meticulous about those early games that this game does as well. And I think it's the thing that I like so much. You commit to things here and you have to see how they play out. You can't just save yourself with iframes instantly, you know. You can't just do some crazy options select. Like this guy here is quite rare. That is an exploding skeleton and he threw a bone at me. In Legacy of Darkness, you don't see the skeletons throwing bones a lot, but in the original you did, and it's annoying. It's really annoying. I'm glad they took that out, and as much as I do prefer 64 to this, it's only because of my nostalgia and how much I played it. Like, Tower of Execution in the original is a pain in the ass because of Medusa heads, and you're not going to see any Medusa heads here, and it's such a good improvement because all it did is make it tedious. Castlevania 64 in many ways has got lots of tedious moments, and I'm not going to say it doesn't. And as much as I love it, you just can't really defend them. They are obnoxious, they're annoying, and they're frequent. And like, look at this. This level has almost no enemies in it, but you do get these lizard guys. And this is another reason why I'd love to learn how to mod this game, because I'd love to go in there and use more enemies and have more things going on, because I think there could be more combat here, and I think the combat could be quite interesting, because I like it, you know. I don't think it's the best combat, I think it's deeply flawed, but I like it, and I appreciate what they were trying to do. And you don't see too many people complimenting Castlevania 64 outside of this retrospectively, we were wrong, there's a good game here, but it's janky. You know, I actually think that there's a lot going on to the game that makes it endearing because of the jank. And it's not one of those things where you learn to put up with it and then you'll have fun. To me, I think the fact it is kind of awkward might be one of the reasons why it keeps me coming back and it keeps me interested, because if I could just make it better and make it work like a modern game, I think it would drastically change the challenges the game presents you with. And I'd love to see what that would be, because if you could use the camera as you normally would in a game nowadays, and if you could make the lock-on work better, I feel like the game would be incredibly easy, because you would just decimate it, because the game is quite easy, you know. And that's not to say that will you have trouble with it. You might have trouble with it, learning where to go and learning how to control and everything, that learning curve I mentioned, but fundamentally, they don't throw too many challenges at you, because the game in and of itself is challenging just to engage with. So they didn't go, let's make this the hardest game in the world, even though 64 absolutely did that in some places, because it's way worse for that. They kind of went, we'll strip back on some of that, because we know that just sheer existence is part of the endurance. And I really like these moments here with the ball falling into the lava and spreading the lava everywhere. I think this is a really cool idea, because you see the telegraphs for where the gaps are, and all you've got to do is thread the needle. And that there is an environmental puzzle that is both interesting and fair. And I think that can be really tricky in older games, to get that balance right. And another area where I talk about being something that I see the Souls in it is the invisible platforms that are in this game. There's quite a lot as well. And of course, there aren't that many instances in Souls games where everything's invisible and everything, but there are some pretty famous areas in Dark Souls known as the Crystal Caves that are like this. And this is one of those moments where I definitely get that inspiration. And it would not surprise me if somebody on that team was a big old school Castlevania fan, because it's just there to be showed, you know. And even earlier on, you get in the very first level of the game, there's an invisible platform where you have to do a leap of faith. And it's very Indiana Jones, But it does make me wonder now. And it's just because there's so many games that were inspired by older games, and we sometimes forget that that's the thing. Am I trying to grind skeletons here? What am I doing? I think this was the moment when I realized that I didn't have enough money, so I'm trying to get something to respawn, but because they took all the enemies out, it's kind of tricky to do that. So instead I think I'm going to be walking on this bit here, right? Yeah. So this is the invisible platform. And it's interesting this, because there's a dynamic spawn when you trigger it. As soon as you do that and you go back, 2 bomb skeletons are going to turn up. They're there, do you see them? I love the idea of this, and they both drop tons of money. I'm curious if there's more of these in this level that I just don't know about. And if you know of any secret guys, please feel free to share them, because on the wiki right now, they have secrets for a lot of the levels, but I don't think they have any for Tower of Execution, because I just think it's a bit short and maybe there's not that many. And again, I like the richness of the game having all these little nuances to find, because they're only small details, but they go a long way. And it's one of the reasons why I've always loved that stuff mechanically, because I just think it's really, really interesting. I also love the Iron Maidens here as well, because I like Tower of Execution. I struggled with it when I was younger, but I'll always remember it fondly because it's where you find the bonus costume for Reindar, and I didn't know at the time that that outfit was inspired by classic Castlevania, because of course I think it's one of the outfits he wore in one of the NES ones. So to me it was just Reindar's cool costume, and it was my favourite, so inadvertently back in the day I liked the true Castlevania costume more than the Castlevania 64 one, which I think is just the way it should be, right? And I used to draw that costume as well because I thought it was sick. This bit here is a bit mean, and I'm not entirely certain what I did wrong on recording, but I did this one time and I jumped towards this area and the block wasn't far enough out and I missed it and I died. I fell straight in the lava, and I've never done that before, so I'm not certain what I did wrong. I think I just must have done some awkward timing, and it kicked my ass. But that, ladies and gentlemen, was the Tower of Execution. Very short in this game, and then we get to the Tower of Sorcery. And I have to tell you a little story here, because I love this stage, but they got the colours wrong. But we're not going to talk about that. What we're going to talk about is on normal. On normal, I thought this stage was awesome, because it's quick, and I think it really pops, you know, with the bright colours of the crystals in this vacuum of blue darkness with all these stained glass windows. It reminds me of the staging area from Kingdom Hearts, where Billy Zane is waxing poetic and we're going up to the portraits and seeing all the princesses and picking our stats, and it's all very otherworldly and ethereal. This reminds me of that. However, on normal, the enemy placement is really sparse, so this is just a pretty short but sweet platforming sequence with 2 save points. On hard, this is a fucking nightmare, man. So I'm not certain if it's the crystals firing more, or if the crystals are in a different position, or what it is. What I can tell you is the platforms move a lot faster than they do on normal. But something has changed, and it leads to you getting shot a lot. And when I did this on normal, it was 1 attempt, and I didn't get shot at all. I didn't even see them fire at me. Whereas here, they can shoot you when you're not even on the platform. You can grab a platform, and they will edge guard you like fucking melee, dude. It's insane. So this segment doesn't look like much, but it's actually very hard, because if you try to force it, you have to get lucky and have them miss, or you just die. And I died here a bunch of times, and I ended up getting really annoyed because I liked it so much on my practice run. But that just goes to show the difference between normal and hard in this game is legit. And then these sequences. So of course, these lightning crystals are here to kind of put you off, but these guys are disappearing, and the more red they go, that's when they're going to leave. And you have to be really careful, not on this one, but I think it's on the next one, where if you follow the crystal with lightning too strongly, you'll miss the other one and end up falling every time. It's very particular. But I'm looking forward to playing Carrie's story on Castlevania 64 and seeing this stage on emulator in all its glory, because it had some really striking colours, and here it looks a lot more muted, and I don't know why. Because I like the fact that they've shortened it, even though I do think that the Tower of Sorcery is probably a better level when you play it with Carrie. I like the fact that it is just unadulterated platforming, but it's quick. And that, to me, is the ultimate palette cleanser between this and between what's coming, because after this I think is the clock tower, isn't it? We're coming up on the end of the game now. And the clock tower was always a super short stage in Castlevania 64, whereas here they've made it longer. And because they've made it longer, it makes it feel like a larger campaign. And I know some people who do prefer the old clock tower. By the way, that crystal over there, I think you can just walk towards it and there's another hidden platform. But because this area was pissing me off, I didn't do it on recording. And then I forgot to go back and check. But we get to the Room of Clocks. This is where you're going to be making some of your final saves if you want to. I was curious if you could go back, and of course you can't. And then in this room, it's going to lead us onto the roof where we're going to be fighting against the rival fight of this game. You haven't really seen Ortega because I've been trimming him out, sadly, but he looks really cool. One of my biggest grievances with Legacy of Darkness when it first came out is you spend the whole game being teased by this werewolf guy who's just like you. He's a beast man. Oh, I'm going to spend my money here, by the way. I just bought everything I could. I'm not really using anything, so it's not a big deal. But I thought that this was leading to a proper rival fight where it would be two werewolf guys beating the shit out of each other like Yakuza on a rooftop with their shirts off, right? That's not what happens. He turns into is it a griffin? A manticore? I can't remember what creature this is. It's been a while since I was up on all the shit I've destroyed in God of War, but you get my idea. It's this chimeran thing with 3 heads. And this is actually one of the hardest fights in the game. But it's not hard for the reasons that you think. It's hard because he's got a boatload of HP, and if you attack more than once, you are risking him just jumping on top of you and contact damaging you. And then later on, he also has the ability to grab your ass, and the grab is really quick. So the strategy is very simple. You fight the camera more than you fight the boss, and you just whiff punish the moves. If he ever does the poison breath, when he glows green, you want to go to the side of him and get a ton of damage. If he ever glows yellow, you want to go to the side of him and get a ton of damage, and eventually you'll start to kill the heads. But this is, in my humble opinion, a difficult fight for bad reasons. It just has too much life, you know? If I were to turn into a wolf here, I could absolutely get away with it because there's a cutscene afterwards, and then I could get my jewels back in the clock tower, and I would have made this a lot faster. But compare this fight to all the other boss fights, and you'll notice he's not taking damage. It's like I'm hitting the wrong head, or I've got to hit him a bunch of times to bank damage like the skeleton at the start. It just feels a bit strange. And I've not really talked about that, so this is a good time to do so. Damaging bosses in this game feels weird. It feels like there's either a sweet spot on the damage, it feels like the life is governed in a non-linear fashion, or it feels like there might be counter-hit frames. And you'll see this on Dracula coming up, which is really important. When you attack bosses, when they're attacking, they seem to take more damage. And I don't know if it's because you multi-hit them, so they just take 2 hits instead of 1. I don't know if there is actually a window there designed for this to be a thing. But a lot of the times when you attack a neutral boss, you do reduce damage, and then as they do an action, you get that big bang. I don't know why. I don't have answers. I wish I did. Sadly, there's not enough information on this game because it does have somewhat of a stigma attached to it thanks to the insanity of people being unwilling to give something a chance. But like, look right now, I'm hitting this guy a lot, but he is not taking damage. He's taking damage now. Look at that damage. That's what it should be all the time. And I love the blue bar with the green chunks because it reminds me of the bullets from Moochie Moochie Pork, which is an absolutely fantastic shmup. And who knows, maybe I'm doing something wrong here, but truth be told, dodging this boss and turning around and attacking when the camera's just not your friend, it's really tricky. And I'm super glad that I got this in like 2 attempts because this is the most boring fight in the game for me. It's just way too long and it's not as engaging as it could be, and I would really prefer if Ortega was just like an amped up werewolf with some special moves like Giles was. I think that would have been really sick, even though of course he was a vampire. And if you're wondering why it keeps saying use lock-on, when you hold right button, it will lock on, but it don't really lock on that great. I could have killed him then because I stunned him, but there you go, that's the fight. And it's just obscenely long, and who knows exactly why. I certainly don't. But on my mod for this game, I would reduce his HP. Hell, I would change that fight entirely. But we're coming up towards the end of the game here, and I'm running out of some things I wanted to say, and the problem with a commentary such as this is you get into the debates and the discussions, and you go in all the different turns and the twists, but you don't end up talking about several things you intended to, because it's just the nature of the beast. One of the things I did want to mention, though, was Castlevania in 3D. So, of course, the first foray into the 3 dimensions was 64. Then they did this later on that year once they've revised it a bunch and got a little bit more confident with the tech. And then on the PlayStation 2, they had Lament of Innocence, different team, different Castlevania. And then after that, I think 2 years later, we got Curse of Darkness. And that was in 2005. It's been 20 years since Konami made a 3-dimensional Castlevania. Unless there's something I'm not thinking of. Isn't that crazy to think about? That unless you consider this, which is a Castlevania that gets a lot of shit, unless you consider those PS2 games, which are Castlevanias that get a lot of shit, Konami have never really tried to do 3D again and to do it right, or what they might perceive to be the best of all their strengths. And I say this because I am a defender of Castlevania 64, and I have been one since it came out, because there's a lot of people that want to tell you that it's a bad game, and I honestly don't think it is. Nothing wrong with disliking it, nothing wrong with having problems with it. It is a troubled game, but it is not a bad game, and it never was. However, I did not like the PlayStation 2 Castlevanias, and I'm going to go back and experience them again. This room is really awkward, guys, because Cornell will not lock onto this flea man. So I'm in this position where if I touch him, I'm going to take damage. What you can do here, if you want to, you can run past these enemies, or jump past them, or slide past them, and touch that save point, and they will despawn. That's one way of doing that, but I end up fighting with the game, and this is Castlevania 64 at its worst, because it's a small room, there's multiple enemies, and it's just not doing what I want it to do. Again, I'm not going to tell you it's a perfect game, because it's not. Oh, there's also a lot of enemies in this room on hard. This is way worse. So good luck. But I got Lament of Innocence on the PS2, and I was really excited because of these games. And I think that game has got really good combat. I think it looks really cool as well. I like the soundtrack. I love the cover and the artwork by that woman that works at Konami, or worked at Konami. Everything about that game should have appealed to me and should have been my bag. But I hate the level design. And it really pissed me off. And it bummed me out big time, because you've got these really cool systems, you've got this really cool graphics, you've got Castlevania, you've got it in 3D, and then they just directly tried to do Symphony of the Night in 3D. So it's just endless square rooms and corridors like we're in that movie Cube, just constantly going either east, north, south, or west to a corridor, to a transitionary period, and then into another room, and you just do that the whole game. And it killed me, it did. I ended up taking it back and trading it in because I hated it. And I take no pleasure in saying this, but it's true. And I hated it because of this game. And then when the next game came out, I thought, oh wow, maybe they'll go in there and do something different. Maybe they'll give it some more verticality. Maybe they'll give it some level design. Maybe they'll make it interesting so that it's not just doing what you did on the Game Boy games repeatedly, where it worked in 2D, but it didn't translate very well to 3D. And I'm sure that those games have got fans, and there's some people that really like that, because, you know, people like fucking anything, don't they? And that's awesome. But I hated it. And then I thought that that game, Curse of Darkness, was worse. I thought it was even more boring. Because it just felt like the fucking same level stretched out. And it sucks as well, because in that game, you play as Hector, I think, and he looks awesome. And I love the guarding, and I love the dodging. The combat is amazing, but it's trapped in this game where all you do is play Smash TV. And I love Smash TV, guys, I do, but Smash TV is 20 minutes long. When you have Smash TV's level design, for 10 hours, you want to fucking shoot yourself. And the thing that's the worst for me, the irony on top of ironies, is that this is a game that lots of people apparently love to dislike, love to criticize, and love to talk shit about. Yet I think those PlayStation 2 Castlevanias, with their awesome graphics and their awesome combat and their awesome controls, because they control a lot better than this game does, if they had had this level design, they would have been considerably better Castlevanias. Because for all the sins that this has, when you navigate these zones, they're different. There's progression, there's peaks, there's valleys. You go places, and each of the zones are somewhat different, and it's cool to explore because it has exploration. It doesn't just feel like go in room seals off, fight a big wave of enemies, go through corridor, go in room, identical room, and then the rooms are just, it's like the fucking Bloody Palace. I love the Bloody Palace, but if Devil May Cry's level design had been Bloody Palace, I don't think people would have loved those games the same. I think they would be in the same crowd that the Muso crowd is, where you love the combat and everything else is just what you put up with because the fucking stories and the characters and the combat is cool. And that's why I do believe if those PS2 games had level design like Devil May Cry 3, or even Devil May Cry 1, or like Ninja Gaiden, or indeed like Castlevania 64, then they would have been received a lot better. People would look upon them a lot more fondly than they do, even though they are good games. It's just, you either get with the level design, or you don't. It's that simple. I just think we could have had something special, and then Konami would have made more, and we wouldn't have gone 20 years without Castlevania. Because as much as I think Lords of Shadows is a solid game with some wonderful presentation, and Mercury Stream tried their best to do something different, and I think they were successful, that game is a God of War clone. That's what it is. It is a very creative, very like all over the place, kind of spread a bit too thin God of War clone. Because that's what was popular at the time. But the thing that pisses me off is that before God of War existed, Castlevania was throwing the chains. You know, you were whipping dudes long range, you were doing all this navigation, you were fighting all these tough bosses. And that to me is so much more special in what it is, but you've got to be Castlevania. I don't want my Castlevania to be something else. And of course, I just mentioned there that it would have been nice if the level design was a bit closer to this game and a bit closer to that game. That is in inspiration only. Not in just one-to-one, because I don't want Ninja Gaiden Castlevania, and I don't want Devil May Cry Castlevania, and we've learnt this year that we don't want pseudo-platinum Ninja Gaiden because you get neither. You get the best of no worlds. What I wanted was this series to get a better chance. And I feel like I'm almost like a cursed fruit in many ways, because my favourite Mega Man is Legends. And that is the 3D Mega Man that a lot of people do not like, because it's not like the old ones. My favourite Castlevania is 64, which is the 3D Castlevania that a lot of people do not like. And if you're like myself and you're a fan of these kind of black sheeps of these games families, you didn't get any more. You know, you didn't get an opportunity to play another experience and to see them iterate and to see how they develop and how they would continue to push it forward, because nobody really makes those games. And right now, we're lucky because we're in this wonderful renaissance of all the people who grew up in my generation, a bit younger and a bit older. They're now growing up to be developers. They're now making games. And they're making games inspired by games like this. So we now have games that look like PlayStation 1 games, and games that look like N64 games. And eventually, we're probably going to get some super cool game that was inspired by this, which is not necessarily the spiritual successor, but it's using all of that cool legacy stuff that they were brought up with, and then they're taking it to that next dimension and then that next iteration, and we will get a cool new game that is what this could have been if Konami had have put more faith and more money into it. And I've tried to watch some videos, you know, like what happened with Castlevania, and to see what was going on in the production, to see what was happened. And the only thing I can really get from it, from what I've seen, seems to be that it was quite a rushed production. And, you know, they were struggling to kind of figure out how to do it, let alone how to do it well. And that's always more difficult when you don't even know how to start, let alone, you know, making the good things once you have started. I also heard that because Castlevania 64's reception wasn't, you know, all blockbusters, 10 out of 10s everywhere, that it affected this game as well. Because the marketing budget was a lot lower. But other than that, I honestly don't really know too much. I also know that there's a guy, isn't there, that everybody associates with Castlevania because he worked on the ones that people love. They call it the eager Castlevanias, right? That guy who's now left and gone on. I think, is he the dude that made Bloodstained? But that guy is Mr. Castlevania for a lot of people. And he has openly excommunicated Castlevania 64 because it doesn't live up to his standards or what he likes. And look how fast this trap is moving, by the way. If you play this game on normal and you look at that thing, it barely swings. On hard, though, it is whipping. But can you imagine excommunicating something just because it's not your thing? That sounds like such a young man's game, doesn't it? And yet here we are. How old is that guy? Isn't he 50? It's fucking weak sauce is what it is. But I respect it. Then again, my favourite 2D Castlevania is Circle of the Moon. So there you go. Eager, take that, dog. By the way, this is the worst piece of platforming in the game. The camera is awful here. What they want you to do is kind of awful here. And if you do it wrong, you take fall damage. All of it is terrible. People like to say this game has horrible platforming, but it's not true. That right there is a singular example of Castlevania's terrible platforming. I can do it. I've done it a dozen times. I still don't like it, and I still don't agree with it. But we're running out of time now, ladies and gentlemen, so we're going to have to talk about the final boss. We're also going to go and fight Renan now. Because I've just bought a bunch of bullshit from the shop after using the cheat engine to give me a bit more money, because I think I was about 4,000 or 5,000 gold off it, which is crazy to think about how you're supposed to get that much gold to even get betrayed by the merchant. This is the castle keep. Amazing music. Legendary staircase. Absolutely adore this place. Dracula is, for all intents and purposes, a very cool boss. He looks great. His patterns are somewhat interesting. The room is cool. The music is great. The second phase looks really cool and has some really good ideas. But there's things that just don't quite work. And it's all to do with targeting, and it's all to do with hit detection. So, right now what you're witnessing is me getting a really good pattern from this boss, because this boss doesn't dive bomb me, and he doesn't do the fish, he just kind of runs around and I'm hitting him, and I'm getting really lucky so none of the fireballs are being too bad and catching me, but perspective is difficult here. The trickiest part about this fight is just not getting clipped by shit, but it's actually a really simple fight, it's not bad at all. And I'm doing good damage because my weapon's upgraded, and it's pretty much over. Dracula has a certain window where you hit him, where you flinch him, and it's during his attacks usually. And sometimes when you hit him, you do small damage, sometimes when you hit him, you do big damage. I've talked about it a little bit earlier on. The problem is, when you attack Dracula, you interrupt his attacks, but sometimes when you attack him, it doesn't hurt him, and it doesn't interrupt his attacks, and it can lead to you trading with something, and it's not your fault. It's just the game not really working. And sometimes it makes sense. Sometimes you attack him and maybe his hand is raised and it hits his hand and it blocks his face. So in those instances, I don't have any problems with it. But there are other times when he eats it and he just tanks it, takes no damage, does what he wants, and gets away with murder. And I have huge issue with that because it's just bullshit. And it makes the fight longer. When you're trying to do no damage, it makes you take damage, so you have to reset. And because this is two bosses in a row and they're very challenging, it's just kind of super annoying. The second phase, every part of it is very particular. So at the beginning you have to dodge lightning, and the way I'm going to do it, I'm going to run to the right of the screen, and as soon as it telegraphs the lightning, I'm going to turn around, run towards the other side of the screen, and as soon as I see the telegraph there, I'm going to angle towards me, as I was playing, towards what the screen is facing, back towards him, and as I angle, I'm going to arc myself, and as I turn, I'm going to fire. And when I fire, his weakness is going to open up, which is his core, and I'm going to hit him, it's going to do giant damage, it's going to stun him, and I'm going to hit him again. If done correctly, both hits will double connect and take off half his HP. After that, he's going to fly away and he's going to throw fireballs at me. So I'm going to shoot them. I'm going to pre-fire the first one, I'm going to shoot the second one, and then I'm going to sprint to the left and slide to avoid the third one. The third one is complete bullshit RNG sometimes. Sometimes it hits you, sometimes it doesn't. It's completely out of your control. When he comes back, I'm going to stand on the left, I'm going to attack him, and he's going to punch me. As he punches, I have to jump to the right and dodge him as he starts moving. If I don't, I lose. If I do that, I've won. Here is the lightning, there's the stun, there's the 2 hits. Now's the fire phase. I'm going to wait just as he is about to fire it, standing on the right, Bushka. I'm going to wait for the lock-on symbol, Bushka, and I'm going to sprint to the left and slide. I get lucky, and then this is the moment of truth. Can I dodge it? I can, and he's dead. This looks easy, but it's the hardest fight in the game. And there's a real reason why I used that just then. Because it's ridiculous. Using the werewolf form makes that fight a lot easier and a lot more fun. Without it, you have to fight him for much longer and dodge more moves, and some of the other moves are very hard to dodge. The ice, you have to misdirect by jumping. The weird worms, you can all shoot them at the right timing and it's not too bad, and then he does the lightning again. Dodging lightning twice in one attempt is incredibly difficult to do. But you see just then, he no-regged both those hits, which is really annoying. But I put this on to show you just how long it takes to fight him when you're not the wolf. Because I killed this boss easily like 30 plus times trying to get that clip you just watched. Because it's hard as fuck, dude. It's really, really hard. And if you're wondering about the lightning moves, you can stand in the gaps in one of the lightning move and you can run away from the other lightning move. But one of the problems on this fight with Dracula is that in the corners of the area, there are 2 pillars next to each other and he loves to get stuck teleporting to those pillars. You can use it to trap him and kind of spawn camp him, but every so often he no-regges and you get hit. So it's kind of awkward. And what I like to do is I like to do what I did just then. I like to keep myself in a certain part of the room, wait for him to teleport near me. If he doesn't teleport near me, there's only one area I'm not looking at where he'll be, and I'll jump and fire at that and try and hit it, and that's what I did. And it works wonders, actually. You can stand in the coffin, and the coffin will neutralize most of the moves. You can stand in like a corner and get him to keep teleporting to the same spot, but every so often he can throw a curveball at you and it doesn't work so well. But I like to fight him, so I stand in the room and I get hit a bunch and it takes me a bit longer. But there you go, ladies and gentlemen. That is Castlevania Legacy of Darkness, hard mode, no damage. I love this game. I hope you enjoyed me sharing it with you. You take care now.